Welcome to my channel. Today in this video lecture series, we will learn or we will discuss about a new field of literary theory and literary criticism, that is geocriticism. Dear friend, the lecture is full of information about the basic concepts, different literary terms, different major critics, their theories in this literary theory. So I request you not to skip any part of this video and watch it till the end of the video so that you can understand it properly and all your doubts and queries will be removed. And dear friend, please like, share, subscribe my channel, and please comment too on the video. How do you like it or not? Okay, so dear friend, the objective of our lecture is to understand what is geocriticism, the origin of geocriticism. Then we will see who are the major geocritics and what does geocritic do. Then we will see the basic assumptions and the concepts of geocriticism, and then we will try to widen our scope by inquiring the basic tenets of geocriticism. Dear friends, you know that time and space have been originally interlinked to the fictional text, that is the setting of the work. When and where does it take place is one of the basic questions that the reader asks himself or herself when he starts reading a text. So dear friend, the space is an important term in literature. Nowadays, a transdisciplinary phenomenon in humanities is common. The spital term is the transdisciplinary phenomenon in humanities. It is coined for the first time in 1989 by Edward Soja in Postmodern Geographies. She used the term to explain the increasing concern of the academics in the social sciences for the space in 1960s. All critics like Robert Raleigh, Greg Gerald, then Bertrand Westphal agree upon the omnipresence of the space, place, and mapping at the core analysis in geocriticism. Dear friend, geocriticism was theorized by Bertrand Westphal in his innovative work published in 2007 entitled as Geocriticism, Real and Fictional Spaces. It is a new mean for reading and literary criticism, a new interdisciplinary method of analysis that gives priority to place, to space, and geographical practices in literary criticism. Textual and real place are at the core of the analysis. It tries to describe space as a new critical category. It poses question whether a place should become a new critical category in addition to race, class, and gender. For example, perhaps you know the feminist criticism which interrogates about the gender. Marxism is there that introduce questions about the class. So geocriticism, it interrogates about the space. It is a new critical inquiry, a new critical category in our critical inquiry. Whether it is a legitimate to say that literary text enables us to work on the object space which does not belong to geography only. So what does It brings to literary criticism to use geographical tools like characterography or geocritical concepts. Can literary text be source for the geographer? So all these are the questions that the geocritics ask. Literature, especially in the postmodern era, has a close affinity with the concept of the space. In literature, the concept of the space is regarded as physically exciting, existing environment in which the event or the story happens or occurs. A literary writer tries to give a new picture of life to reader by combining a represented place of a real world with the imaginary spaces. So in literature, we find two types of space. One is the real and another is the imaginary. And writer provides the combination of the both. So the writer combines the imagined and the real space to get the desired effect in his art. Sometimes the representation of the space and the place are mere copy, or sometimes they wholly imaginary in order to represent the utopian society. So this issue has motivated some critics to consider the concept of the place deeply. In this way, geocriticism has come into existence. It tries to analyze the real and the imagined space and their relation with the one another in literature and reality. So dear friend, who are the major geocritics? Dear friend, the major geocritics are Bertrand Westphal, Céline Sabiran, Robert G. Talley, and others. So dear friend, let us see what are the basic concepts of geocriticism. The basic concepts or basic tenets, dear friends. Geocriticism also regards all writing as a map. So it is important for us to consider the concept of the space in literature based on the newly born theory, that is geocriticism. Geocriticism surveys the territory, speculates and suggests about the other possible paths to take and argue in favor of certain practices against the others, all traveling around the multiple discourses of the space, place, and literature. It explores the role of interaction between the imaginary and the real one. So, 19th century had been dominated by the discourse of time, history, and the technological development. But after the Second World War, the space began to reassert itself in critical theory. The effect of the post-colonialism, globalization, and the rise of more advanced information technologies, everything helped to push the space into the foreground as a traditional geographical limits were blurred and erased or the redrawn. Many critics and theorists had to develop a new interpretive and critical methods to address what Frederick Jameson's and Edward Soja called the new spatiality implicit in the postmodern. The perception of the space and the representation of the space do not involve the same things. So the perception of the space and the representation of the space, both are different things. They are not the one thing. So, geocriticism tends to explore the critical practices or a set of practices whereby reader, scholars, and the critics engage with the space that make life through lived space experience or uh, through imaginary projections. Everything that makes the art meaningful. It tries to answer what happened to the space time in an atomic context in which fiction, among the other form of literature, becomes the key to the reasonable reading of the world. What methodology can we use to understand that which can to escape our understanding? What do we mean by this space? So, dear friend, it is important to understand, it is important to know what does the geocritic do. Dear friend, geocritics have a long advocated geocentric approach to literature and cultural studies. It would allow a particular place to serve as a focal point for the variety of the critical practices. So, just as the feminist view the text from female point of view, similarly, the geocritics they view the text from the geocentered approach. So they looked at various depiction of that multifaceted zone, whether using a classical myth, modern fictions, historical works, tourist brochure, or something else to form a pluralistic image of the place. Our understanding of a particular place is determined not only by our personal experiences with it, but also by our reading about the others' experiences and by our point of view, including our biases and our wistful thinkings. For example, when we read about a novel, British novel, we think or we read about the space, about a geographical location, for example, the London. And sometimes perhaps you or some of us may have visited the place. So we have our own experiences. We have the experience of the writer whom we read, and even we have the experience of the tourist books or tourist brochure also. So all these experiences are included in the geocritical theories. Thus, the geocriticism attempts to understand the real and the fictional space that we inhabit, that we cross across, imagine, survey, modify, celebrates, disparage, and on in an infinite variety. It allows us to understand the real place by understanding their fundamental functionality and vice versa, of course. We understand the fictional space by grasping their own level of reality as they become the part of our world. Geocritics understand that the referentiality of operating between the fiction and the real world is characterized by the constant movement or oscillation whereby one can never really fix or pin down the referential referent. The inability to fix the referent in a literary text makes the project of geocriticism more worthwhile, infinite, and variety of the text that refers to the place in order to shape the vision, ever shifting image and vision of our real and imagined place. So here we can see common parallels between the deconstruction movement, that is the Derrida's different, and the geocriticism that the geocritics do. Geocriticism considers all writing as a map, and the main point is to recognize the real and the imaginary place. Bertrand Westphal argues that the space is more important than time, and the geography is more important than history. Central to the Westphal's conceptions of literary criticism is the conviction that it is not only by emphasizing the referential force of literature that we can understand the essential function of the true literary creations. The referentiality of the fiction, Westphal wrote in his book, the referentiality of the fiction allows it to point to a recognizable place, real or imaginary, or a bit of both at once, while also transforming that place, making it as a part of a fictional world. So far in the study and analysis of the literature concerning the issues and the space, most of the spital analysis were based on the individual point of view. This point of view generally is the point of view of the narrator, who can be real or who can be fictional one. By bringing together the different multiple authors, including the multiple genres and disciplines, the geocritic plans out a number of different points of views, allowing the picture, allowing a diverse perspectives to flesh out, to round out, and perhaps to overcome the stereotype or otherwise a limiting image of a given place. By focusing on our senses, the geocritic can register the sensuous plenum of the place. So, dear friend, all these are what the geocritics do. Dear friend, now let us try to understand the concept of the space. What is space? Dear friend, space is a concept that encompasses the all universe. Space is not empty container. It is oriented towards the infinitely large or reduced to a infinitely small, which is itself infinitely and infinitesimally vast. It can also be vast, and at the same time it can also be so microscopically minute. For example, the space in the galaxy, or a space between 2 seconds. Historically, space has always been the subject of the symbolic reading. The concrete details of the geography often relates to a spiritual humanities rather than the immediate observations. Middle Ages and the medieval times describes the journey of a man towards God, who monopolizes his spirits and conditions his souls, and the medieval space is eminently ontological, psychological, and conclusive. Like times, space becomes sphere of activities of the symbol. All things being created by the God, so they partake of the same transcendental reality, eluding in advance the cleavage that will emerge later between the reality and the fiction, between an affirmed verisimilitude and the supposed unrealistic. Dante conceived his divine comedy according to these panoptic vertical orientations, enabling him to comprehend three dimensions of the afterlife, that is, the hell, purgatory, and the paradise. Space was inherently a speculation of on a supernatural and a reflection of a creation. If the concept of the time is static as a measure of a material action, the conception of the space was more dynamic. The concept of the space, time, has emerged and evolved since Renaissance. In his book Form of Time, Contract in a Novel, Bakhtin, a Russian philosopher, stressed the importance of the major shift from verticality of the time to its horizontality. He might have also added that the perception of the space become vertical, and with the introduction of the perspectives in painting, mapping, and even the alignment of the planets' cylindrical depth in the solar system. This shift has strengthened over the centuries, and it is still hold on us today. But as the postmodernism grows on, so the postmodernists, they undermine the modernist belief that the theory can mirror the reality and replace it with a partial viewpoint, emphasizing the contingent mediated the nature of the theory building. In this context, the role of those art that have imitative relationship to the world is transformed and achieves a greater significance. Literature, for example, literature, cinema, painting, photography, music, even the sculptures, and so on. Are all these aesthetics confined to this task of reintegrating to this world? If the perception of the spatio-temporal referentiality fades, then the fictional discourse conveyed through the art is also transformed from its original vacations. And if the credibility in the fiction has always been measured in the terms of the reference to the real, then the postmodern era, no one can longer say that the world of the cement, concrete, or steel is more real and the world of the paper and the ink. Space, as a center fact of the place, would appear to be a key concept in literature. Space has a timely re-emergence in literary and cultural studies in the recent years. Dear friend, the best example of it is a virtual reality or the PUBG game that you play. So the discourse of the postmodernism has specifically emphasized the importance of the space, geography, cartography as a hyper experience of the postmodern conditions that calls for the orienting and reorienting efforts of the map mapping. Geocriticism, as an interdisciplinary postmodern science of the literary space, usually distinguishes the poetics, imaginary spaces of literary works of the real space. So, how do geocritic analyze a text? That is important thing for us. Westphal, a geocritic, he promotes the geocriticism as a poetics of the interaction between the human space and the literature. Robert Talley, another geocritic, He focuses on the social and the cultural aspect of the space. It explores the role of interaction between the imaginary and the real space. A geocritical analysis examines both and perhaps more pointedly look at the ways in which the two overlap, the real and the imagined, and he resists the one another or to form a new spatial practices altogether. Time and space have been always been intricately linked to the fictional text. So the setting is important for the geocritics. To put simply, one could propose two basic approaches to visible space, one rather the abstract, the other more concrete. The first would encompasses the conceptual space. The second is a factual place. Means geocritics, he point out or he tries to see the two types of places in a work of art. Two types of place. That is, one is the fictional and the another is the real one. The context of the work includes the social, cultural areas amongst the others that organizes the overall architecture of the inhabitant place. In short, context contains the space, place by establishing a meaningful space in the constitution of the place again. So, dear friend, Hans Robert Jauss, the receptionist theorist, he has contributed to the debate by including that here and there the situation begins with which the reality of the everyday life world organizes itself according to the world. Geocritics, Geocriticism probes that the human space that the mimetic arts arrange uh, through it and in the text and the image and cultural interactions related to them. Robert Talley, the another geocritic, he tried to concentrate on the social and cultural aspect of the space. He defines geocriticism as predominantly literary critical methodological frameworks that focuses on the spatial representations within the literary text, while also exploring overlapping the territories of the actual and the physical geography and the of the authors or the characters cognitive mapping in the literary text. So, drawing from the Westphal's theory of geocriticism, Talley introduced his own concept, and that is the literary cartography. So, let us try to understand what is literary cartography. What is it? Mapping and spatial analysis applied to literature, and it has been a long lasting research field. Robert Talley, he conceives author as a map maker and critic or reader as a map reader. So he uses the term literary cartography. So he used it to describe the different ways that the writers use to map the social spaces. Another geocritic, Celine Sabarin, he calls the Waverley novels by Walter Scott as a geographical novel. It might be more proactive statement as Scott has long been said to be the father of the historical novel. But Sabiron argues that Scott's novels are mostly geographical since they are anchored in a very spatial Scotland, that is the Highland, inspired by the writer's travels and in imaginations tribals and imaginations. So even in the poetry, we find the traveling space, like the Ishash where W.H. Auden spent his summer, or Venice perhaps, the place where the romantic poet P.B. Shelley has visited. All these are as a part of his travel to a continental part, which he introduced as a picture sublime scenery that influenced his poetry. Shelley also traveled through the means of a rich intertext that enables the poet to go back in the time to the ancient Roman Rome and the Greece. So these different travels situate in the Italian city between a fascinate and the experienced Venice. So, dear friend, let us try to sum up all our discussions about the geocriticism. So, geocriticism, the general purpose of the geocriticism is to pursue the real and the fictional space that we are dealing with through our life. Westphal, he believes that all writings can be regarded as a kind of cartography in a way that most of the realistic maps are unable to depict. So, in this way, through the reading of fiction and focusing on a fictional place in a narrative one can understand real places. A typical geocritical study would focus on a single place, that is, plurality or the multifocal perspectives of the theory makes it more interesting and more near to reality. So this makes us to ponder the visual dimensions of the geography and more particularly literary geography, as well as the link between the different types of images and the writing space. So, dear friends, this is my thoughts about the geocriticism. Hope you understand it, you like it. Dear friend, please like, share, subscribe my channel and comment on my video whether you like it or not, whatever it may be. But please comment too. And thanks for watching. Thanks a lot.